and SD-WAN fits in, the challenges, the trending along with that, and then we'll end with some Q&A. So I'm going to walk you through who is Razor, why are we relevant in this space, and why are we fans of Silver Peak. So Razor is a Philadelphia-based provider. We provide solutions and throughout the data center network and into the application space. We've been around for 15 years now. Myself have been with the company short of 10 years. We have hundreds of clients. We chose not to go the route of trying to have thousands of clients. We like to provide a agnostic, very high touch, very advocacy and consultancy based approach to working with our customers. We've won over the past years lots of different accolades, everything from being a great place to work as well as being recognized in the industry for our ability to provide solutions, be a great technical company, as well as be a top managed service and cloud provider industry. Give you a view, everybody's got one of these kinds of slides that shows some of the customers we work with. The customer base, no matter how you slice and dice it, whether it's in the financial, insurance, whether it's about media, manufacturing, industry, healthcare, et cetera. In days past, I used to believe that IT was just IT. We've come to learn that there are certainly a lot of organizations and different verticals where different things matter, whether that's security, compliance, regulation, or it's a small company that happens to have hundreds of sites. That there are differences, and here's just a brief snapshot of some of the customers that we work with. So we grew up as a data center organization. We moved into the cloud managed service realm shortly after. We've added what we call digital business solutions, which is more of the application development and application support. We've grown a practice over the last 8 to 10 years as security became more prevalent in environments where having the right amount of security. There's such a thing as too much security when you think of it from a cost perspective. There's such thing as too much security when it comes to protecting your business. And we do IT consulting, short-term and long-term, project management, and support for organizations that either don't have enough time on their hands or don't have all the skills necessary to adopt new technologies. So data center and beyond, we've always focused strongly in all of these categories: server storage, virtualization, backup and recovery, data security and protection in both the data center as well as connectivity between data centers or between a data center and a remote location, cloud managed services, which we'll touch on a little bit more in a second. And as I mentioned, a lot of professional services, whether that's assisting with management or that's assisting in, the proper design and qualifications, proof of concepts, et cetera. And the other one is IT asset management, which we won't get into here, but one of the things that we've found is organizations, still struggle with managing assets, maintenance life cycles, et cetera. And that's another area that we focus in. When we talk services, and this is where our love and appreciation of Silver Peak came from, the world is as a service these days, and Razor provides everything from backup to DR to monitoring, infrastructure, platform, all as a service. And then there's two that have emerged in the last probably 3 years, which are security as a service and SD-WAN as a service. Right out with Office 365, which I guess you could consider is email and collaboration and Office applications as a service. But specific in the SD-WAN space, what we recognized and why we partnered with Silver Peak was, there's organizations out there, that are still concerned about making the move to SD-WAN, or the concern comes from, the lack of skills or resources to make that step into a new technology that could significantly benefit both in cost and in capability flexibility. And where we partnered with Silver Peak specifically for SD-WAN as a service. We've been a long-term partner with them on the product and resale side. And those organizations, Silver Peak's SD-WAN as a service comes with a significant amount of security. There may be organizations that have extra levels, et cetera. We have additional security as a service capabilities that plug and play with SD-WAN as a service, in kind of a very much hand-in-glove situation. Like I said, we've been around for 15 years. We were started by two gentlemen who came from vendor space and realized that, at that time people used the term VAR, value-added reseller, but most companies weren't living up to the V part, the value. And Razor was born as an organization that strives to, deliver that true value. So if you look at kind of the traditional approach, if you're dealing with vendors or you're dealing with a reseller doesn't have a tremendous amount of value add, you get into a high pressure. It's all based on the features, and you can hear from one company one day that theirs is the best thing, and this is why everybody else doesn't match theirs. And the next vendor comes in and says the exact opposite. There's a amount of bias. And then when it comes down to build configuration and deploying that configuration and supporting that configuration, in the vendor community, sometimes there are either hidden costs or things were oversold or underconfigured. Our approach is to focus on you, more specifically to focus on your business. What are the goals and objectives? To be agnostic to the approach. Razor sells to the top 20 different IT vendors and dozens of other vendors out there. And, we will always match the needs, requirements, financials that an organization has to build the best technology solution for your organization. And with, making sure that we analyze the risks, if you have devices that are already on-prem that you've used for years and you're comfortable with, et cetera, help manage what's the risk, what's the hurdle to adopting new technology, and it's not just about the features and the capability. It's about the people and it's about the process and how to actually effectively get there, and that's something that we do every single day. Let's talk a little bit about SD-WAN. So, SD meaning software defined. It's very much like the as a service. There are a whole lot of something, whether it's data center, network, WAN, etc. I myself, even though that picture of me makes me look like I'm still in my 20s, I've been doing this for 25 years, and I grew up in the days of lease lines and frame relay, and then ATM came out as a new transport mechanism, and everywhere along the way there was an increased capability, and that's what drove a lot of the decisions until the internet exploded and VPN became an option, and then MP came out. We're now talking about different protocols running over, different networks, and even back in the early 90s, lots of organizations had ways to balance between multiple networks. Former CCIE, and remember the days of trying to do that, and it took a significantly skilled, dedicated, hardcore person to be able to manage those kinds of connectivity. The other thing that tended to happen, especially when you got into MPLS, was great. Got some of this incredible capability came at a cost, and it came at a significant cost. Introduce SD-WAN. SD-WAN becomes the generation for connectivity. It balances all of that capability and then some with low cost. I'm not going to steal thunder from Rolf. I'm going to pass it off to Rolf Moralt, the VP of Product Management at Silver Peak, to give you the landscape and talk specifically about SD-WAN. I'm also going to pass control over to you, sir. Hold on one second.
Okay, thank you. So while I get set up, I'll just quickly myself. Good morning, everybody. I'm the VP product at Silver Peak. So as a product management person, what I do is more on the inbound side. So I help make the sausage, work with the engineering teams. But one of the other parts that I get to do is essentially go and meet with customers and work around use cases. And so it's not sales and marketing pitch. It's more about just sharing with you some of the use cases. We've been looking at software-defined networking in the wide area network for about 5 years now. We have a product that's been on the market for 3 years. It's called Edge Connect. I'll give you some information about the product, but a lot of the slides in the session really apply across the SD-WAN space. I thought it was maybe more useful for people to kind of get a sense of who's moving. Is it an early adopter market? What are the adoption rates? What are people doing with the technology? More so than a feature-by-feature pitch. So maybe just to lay a little bit of the groundwork before we jump into the use cases. The reason Jay alluded to, MPLS has been around for 20 years, right? So if a technology can last that long, why can it not last another 5 years? And the big reasons are really the ones on this slide. And the first one is the tectonic shift that really set off a lot of the software-defined networking movements, and that is the fact that you used to run your applications within your own walls in a data center or maybe in your headquarters in a closet. That worked when the application was static, locked down in a fixed place. Now, enterprises and customers more and more are looking to lean more towards digital transformation and have a cloud-first mindset. And so they prefer to consume applications as a service. The challenge that poses from a technical point of view is the application is no longer locked down. It's not within your secure walls. So the ability that you need to be able to spin up these applications is also going much higher. So businesses are doing mergers and acquisitions a lot faster. They want to be able to bring these teams online a lot quicker. And people are used from a home consumption point of view of these web services. People are used to being able to sign up to a Facebook, sign up to Uber, sign up to any one of these apps in literally minutes. And that is very, very different from what the traditional MPLS-born and application within the walls of the data center model used to be. The second mega trend that's very relevant to this space, for about 10 years now as an industry, we've debated whether workloads would move from being your private data centers, right, what we call private cloud. Are they going to all move to Amazon? Are they all going to move to Azure? Is it going to be a mix of private and public? I think today the consensus is pretty clear that not only is it going to be hybrid, so a mix of some of the workloads on-prem for you and some of your workloads in the cloud, it's actually a multi-cloud world. So what that means is when you have applications that can be in your data center and some others that are in Amazon, and yet others are maybe Office 365 or some infrastructure as a service workloads in Google, when you have these sort of network topologies, you don't own the network end-to-end anymore. And so a lot of cloud services, you can sign up to Direct Connect for Amazon, you can sign up to sort of point-to-point, very optimized connections between your premise and the cloud, but there's not a whole lot to help you in terms of building one consistent end-to-end fabric that would allow you to move workloads between multiple clouds, so your private cloud and all of the other public cloud services that you may use. And that's really been one of the other challenges that's really come to the world of networking, which is that a fairly static environment became very, very dynamic. The third element is virtualization, obviously from a server point of view, but also from a storage point of view. We went through a huge transition in compute where your server teams were able to maybe manage 10, 20 servers, and all of a sudden with virtualization and VMware from a tool such as vSphere, you can now have admin manage huge farms of virtual machines and do the lifecycle management of these virtual machines much more efficiently, right? So things like zero-touch, policy-based provisioning, a lot of these concepts actually came first from the compute world, but they're now finally making their way into the network. And so as I show you a little bit more about some of the fundamental use cases and agility and also as it relates to security, a lot of these elements we actually learned from the transition that happened in the data center with compute virtualization throughout the last 10 to 15 years. The final element, which is really important, is your workforce is getting more and more mobile, and so they're used to having access to their applications wherever they are. And one of the big of networking in the enterprise has been lately that your users very often, if you're using Office 365, if you're using Skype for Business, if you're using Salesforce, your users very often are getting a much better experience accessing the app from their home than they are from the office. And so that is really what's put a lot of pressure on IT departments to go and look at how do we re-architect some of these networks so that the applications fulfill the user experience that they're expecting. From a specific point of view for the wide area network, we essentially address sort of five main priorities. The first one is consistency of the application performance. And that addresses the last point we talked about on the previous slide, which was if your user is accessing the application from the office, at home, or on the road, their experience should be very much the same from a security point of view, from a performance point of view. Complexity is something that's always been a challenge in the network. And if you think about the fact that today most of your network systems need to be configured on a box-by-box basis using something called the command line interface, that is essentially at the root of complexity, right? It's very, very difficult to automate something that you have to go do box by box, and needless to say, it doesn't scale. The third element, which is very important, is a lot of your spend is flat, right? The goal is not to increase spend in IT, certainly in the infrastructure space. Yet if you look at a lot of the network infrastructure, it consists of fixed function siloed boxes, right? There's a router box, there's a WAN optimization box, there's a firewall box. And from the outside to you, those kind of look different, right? They may have different brands, different paint, right? The form factor is a little bit different. If you actually peel the cover off of those, inside you will find the exact same architecture. They're all same CPU, same types of memory, right? They're all small PCs inside. And so if you looked at what was happening in the network, we decided that hardware was not really the place that we want to go and put in a lot of innovation, because the hardware is standardized and it's essentially Intel's x86 architecture has now also come to the network. What would be great to do is, if we have all this network power within these boxes, can we not just give you one chassis, one device, and then deploy the network functions as software on top? And so that allows you to obviously converge the footprint. It makes it a lot more simple to manage. But the key element is it's also very much more flexible. One of the problems when you have these individual boxes is the cabling, the way that they're working together, what we call the service chain that's getting applied to your traffic, is all hard-coded in the way you plugged in the wires. If you move this to software, now the service chain can be dynamic as well, right? We can change that as well with the software, and that then leads to much increased automation. And so for a lot of the rest that I'll talk about, we'll focus on a lot on the use cases that are really around simplification of the network and automation. Just sort of our product, and it's just make sure we don't get lost in the different sort of naming pieces. One of the elements of software-defined networking that was very much new from a network infrastructure point of view was this idea that you would have a controller, which we call orchestrator. You would have a control element that was a single point of management that was not co-located with the actual, that is at edge, that is in your remote branches, that is in your data center, that is in your cloud instances. And so that decoupling is really what allows companies like Razer to deploy and run your network as a service much more efficiently. It allows you to also be a lot more agnostic of the location where the network is going into, because you can have physical devices, you can have virtual devices, and we have cloud sort of marketplace instances for Amazon and Azure and Oracle, et cetera. So a lot of the power of the software-defined network comes from the fact that the industry has recognized that the control function that you want to be able to use to change policy is not something that has to be on a one-to-one basis with each and every one of your sites. And so when we have customers with 500 and plus sites, obviously that is the source of a huge element of simplification. This illustrator looks like, so I won't go very deep into this. Razer will be happy to schedule a demo for you if you like. But what I did want to emphasize a little bit more was that over the last 3 years or so, you've probably seen there are a fair number of companies in the SD-WAN space. What we've really done in terms of the evolution of our use cases and our features is we're more and more looking at SD-WAN and Edge Connect as a platform. And so if you look at some of the network functions that you can now fulfill on this single device, right, the single x86-based device, it is about segmenting the network. I'll go into that a little bit deeper. It is still for many customers providing an element of area network optimization, but maybe it is not every site, maybe it is not every application. So being able to provide that same feature set, but provide it more as a resource that's on tap, that can then add or take away from depending on your application's needs and the geography of your different sites. A lot of the innovations in the last year or so have gone to making cloud applications run better. I'll also dig into that use case a little bit more in the next couple of slides. And then finally, security has become a huge focus. We have some false security elements built in. We have a fairly new, very important feature set which is coming out this spring, which is a full zone-based firewall, and I'll explain a little bit more how that works. But we also partner with all of the best-of-breed firewall vendors so that you can automate the provisioning of the firewall service, free orchestrator, but you're still using your known and trusted firewall data path inspection on the other side. So give you the benefit of the automation, but let you keep the best of breed firewalls that you may already have purchased and deployed in your own environment. For the cases that we've essentially seen emerge, the very original use case, as some of you are probably familiar with, has been the idea of, can we augment my MPLS network using an internet pipe? And I tend to call that MPLS arbitrage. That is still a use case for customers, but the use cases have grown and matured quite a bit since that initial one. One use case today that we focus on is that of cloud applications. I'll show you a bit more on that. The idea of IT agility with automation is the second use case. Third is simplifying the architecture. To connect to your sites, you're using routers. We can deploy with the routers that you have today, but we can also replace these routers. And so one of the debates that's also certainly for us been settled in the last few years is the fact that the routing protocols that you're running in your enterprises today are still relevant in the SD-WAN world. What is not so relevant, in our opinion, is having these small individual router devices strewn around your network that are sort of not centrally managed. So we can deploy with existing routers that you have. Gives a great migration strategy to go from your existing environment into the new world. But there is a great opportunity for us to actually replace these routers because we run the routing protocols such as BGP and OSPF natively as well. And so you can obviously get a better ROI. You can simplify your networks, your networks quite a bit with that. So that's really one of the big use cases that we've seen gain a lot of traction this year. Customers, even if they don't have a plan to maybe take out their routers tomorrow, from a long-term perspective and a vision point of view for the CIO, that is starting to be something that's fully baked in. And a little bit about service assurance as well as some of the security innovations. Just a quick recap on the virtualization. I mentioned that we learned a lot from what had happened in compute virtualization. The reason that server virtualization is so powerful is it allowed you to go and provision your hardware ahead of time of knowing what application you're actually going to need to run on that hardware. If you think about pre-VMware 20 years ago, if you your business wanted to deploy a new application, right, SAP, Oracle, the first thing you would go and do was you would issue an RFP or you'd go talk to a reseller about the server that was the hardware that was going to run that application. What it did was essentially force you into a 6 to 18 month rollout cycle for any given new application because you started from the ground up specifying that hardware. What virtualization did with the hypervisor was it allowed you to decouple the needs of the application from what the physical hardware presented. It allowed you to buy standardized servers, right, 2-socket, Xeon, x86, rack mount pizza boxes, and you could then present that hardware resource to the application in any way that it wanted to see. So for example, if your server had 2 10 gigabit per second network interface cards, but the application really wanted to see 2 HBAs and 2 1 gig Ethernet interfaces, the hypervisor could give it that abstraction. From the application's point of view, it thought it was running on a real server, even though it was just a virtual machine environment. We essentially are bringing the same abstraction to the network. And so on the network side, your physical resource isn't CPUs, it's transports. So you have MPLS, you have internet, you have more and more now 4G LTE being a true network, enterprise-grade way of connecting branch sites. And then on top of that, we will add the abstraction layer that allows you to decouple the needs of the application from a network point of view from what the underlying physical infrastructure provides. Topology can be dictated differently from application to application. If you're doing voice over IP, you want to have minimized latency, so you want to have what we call a full mesh network. For other types of application, the topology might be more logical, that of a hub and spoke or sort of a star topology. You can now describe these needs from a software point of view and not have to go back to your service provider and order new MPLS connections whenever you bring up a new site, or order internet connections for some of your internet destined traffic. All of these just become resource pools in the same way as in compute. The server hardware is a resource pool, the application. And so that was a lot of what we started out with, and then we built essentially on top of this abstraction. One of the key things that an SD-WAN network should allow you to do is what is called microsegmentation, and you may have heard of the term data center. So the exact same concept is coming to the wide area network. When you run networks that have a very rich mix of different applications, these different applications are going to have different requirements of what they would like to see from the network. So for example, your credit card processing application may need to have PCI compliance. Obviously, encryption is a part of that. You may want to have very high quality from a loss point of view, so your credit card transactions as they run don't hang for too long. You may need to log all of these transactions, so you may need to have a topology that can bring that traffic to your data center or your financial processing partner's data center. So you want to have very tight control on the path end to end from the user all the way to your bank. And so that's a very different kind of application from a real-time application such as WebEx or Skype for Business, where you're looking to essentially get the traffic to the service provider with the minimum amount of latency. Security may not be big of a concern. You're probably not logging the phone calls, and so very, very different sort of requirements for these different applications. Traditional network is one size fits all. The beauty of the SD-WAN approach is we now have this abstraction layer. We can describe the needs per application differently depending on what you want to see. And so this is one of the key concepts of an SD-WAN. So this is a piece that was part of our feature set. Another element that I'll also mention that is very much tied to the idea of microsegmentation is that as you are using multiple physical transports, you would like to be able to hide any degradation in that physical transport. And so one of the keys, and this is a little bit of a Silver Peak unique element in this presentation, one of the goals that we had was that enterprises could not just add internet to their MPLS, but that if they want to, they could actually use whatever internet connection resource they had available to them, including consumer grade. So not just business grade internet, but also consumer grade internet, and that we would achieve the resiliency and the SLA that the application needs through bonding, putting these two elements together, and packet by packet, automatically, this is essentially visible to you because we have dashboards that report it, and this is basically a screenshot of that. But it is invisible for you in terms of the execution of that function of which traffic takes any given link, and maybe depending on the quality, we're going to send redundant information down a secondary path and recombine that at the receiving end to present the application with an overall logical network that looks all clear, that looks all green. And so that is kind of one of the key parts of what you want to achieve as an IT administrator. You don't want tickets from your users, and so if you can hide the fact that you may have issues at the transport level, you can achieve that. One of the additional benefits some of our customers have realized from this is that when you purchase an MPLS circuit from your provider, often it'll come with a contract that guarantees you some sort of SLA. It's very difficult for you to hold your service provider that contract because you don't generally have the instrumentation to being able to actually go and measure whether the SLA is upheld or not. This dashboard gives you that as well. We have customers that are essentially automating, sending emails to their service provider based on issues in the underlying network. Optimization, this is also Silver Peak unique feature. If you choose to use WAN optimization for some of your traffic replication or for your geographically distributed enterprise that maybe has some offices outside of the United States where latency is an issue, this is something we offer as a service on top. It is an optional component. For the last 5 minutes, I'm just going to end with the element of what the SD-WAN can provide you that your legacy network is having a hard time with. If you think about moving from on-premise applications to cloud applications, cloud is really a big world, right? So you probably have a natural selection of the buckets that your applications are going to belong to. You probably have some cloud applications like Office 365 or Box or Workday or Salesforce that are your mission-critical business applications. You're probably wanting to provide a different sort of service level to your enterprise users accessing these applications from maybe BitTorrent, whether you love it or not, or Netflix or YouTube. So there's a very wide spectrum of applications that may be ones that you don't mind providing your users access to. But if you had underlying data crunch time where your network resources started to get a little bit tight, those would be the ones that you would like to be able to push back on and ensure the SLA for your enterprise applications contain essentially the business piece of your network. And so the only way that you can really allow this differentiated service to multiple categories of cloud applications is if your network can understand and recognize the application that the customer, the user is going to. That is something that is very, very difficult. For those of you that are familiar with deep inspection, DI techniques apply to about a few thousand of standard applications like Oracle databases, real-time transport protocols, but HTTP and HTTPS is the single common transport to all of your cloud applications, and the content within is encrypted. And so for a lot of customers that have a traditional network, all their cloud apps just look like HTTPS. And for many of our customers, the amount of traffic that is going to the cloud is now tending to about 60 to 70%. So 60 to 70% your traditional network infrastructure is essentially this blob of HTTPS traffic. And so one of the elements that we've built, which I won't go into kind of the technical detail of it, but is sort of using a large element of machine learning, is we've essentially built a capability to immediately recognize your users' traffic against a database of about 300 million web domains. And so when you implement policy, and we've got predefined policy for all of the well-known category of applications, you can say mission-critical applications, shopping applications, I may let my users do shopping from work, but they're not going to get the same service level, and I'm going to segment those into different one end-to-end microsegments. And so that is what we've called first packet IQ from a feature set point of view. But this is really the key piece that you want to see for a cloud-first transformation, where you're moving your applications from on-premise to a SaaS environment. And so that was a large piece of our 8.1 release. We are now shipping on version 8.1. So as Jay alluded to, these technologies are now become very, very mature. So we're definitely seeing a transition from the early adopter to sort of a mass market adoption. We're coming up fairly soon on about 1,000 customers. So this is a very, very rapidly growing technology in the market. Gartner has essentially forced this market to eventually replace 50 to 80% of your traditional routers, and so this is something that is definitely ready for prime time. I won't go into the detail of some of these slides, just in the interest of time to give a bit of time to questions. But I wanted to quickly finish on the router replacement slide, just because it's something that customers are asking me about nowadays. And so when you think about replacing your current routers that you have in your branch sites, the fact is that you'll essentially be able to reduce about 50% of your costs for these. So this is now not the MPLS arbitrage. This is really the reduction in costs from the consolidation and the simplification of the architecture by having the routing piece delivered as a software function in a software-defined WAN wide area network, as opposed to being a discrete box that has its own life cycle, that needs to be replaced, that fails, that has to be configured. And so this is really some of the metrics that we're seeing now, being a few years into some smaller and some really large customer deployments. And so I would encourage you to really think about how to stop getting routed. And so you'll see probably marketing from Solar Peak along these lines, but it's very much a real ROI, and there's some hard numbers we can put to this. With that, Jay, I think I'll pass it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rolf. So the last thing for those that have attended, as part of being an attendee, its webinar, Razor is offering a free, yes, it's free, SD-WAN Readiness Compilation, to help you guys make the decisions of, are you ready? Or even if you are ready, what's the best way to go about, deploying? As Rolf mentioned, there's, you can go anywhere from kind of the MPLS arbitrage to router placement, or a combination of both, or both of both. And that's something that for those of you that attended is offered up. Reach out to the link from the webinar, or Jane directly to you. And that's at this point. Jane, why don't you take it over? Do we have any questions?
We actually have a few questions that rolled in the webinar. I'll walk you through the first one. I work for a smaller organization, and we are interested in SD-WAN technology, but don't necessarily have the resources to handle how the managed SD-WAN model work.
I'll take that one, Rolf. You can add in. I think it starts with the slide we're on. Sitting with us, the risk consultation is, doesn't take a lot of time. It's, essentially, looking at how you're doing it today, number of devices, number of sites, different vendors, talk about the workload, talk about the size of the connectivity, et cetera, and come up with a plan. The SD-WAN as a service can offer is kind of a fast track for organizations that may not necessarily have the capabilities today, and you get there faster with support from both Razorwire and Silver Peak. And that can be short-term or long-term. For organizations that want to maintain control of their network, we can construct the SD-WAN as a service in a time frame that allows you to get there, get the training, get the comfort that you need to be able to capture this service, and then take over if that's something you want to manage in-house long-term, or if you're an organization that is looking to move more from a CapEx to an OpEx and kind of bundle your WAN costs with the management of your WAN, we can do that long-term as well. So, the reality is, as Rolf said, the way the industry is moving, SD-WAN isn't just a flash in the pan. It's a technology, a next generation go-forward technology is both increasing capability and reducing costs. And I would even say also reducing time to manage. And with that extra capability, now even if you chose to keep some of your connectivity, whether it be MPLS or otherwise, you've got a tool that helps make sure that those activity links are being managed properly, and you're getting your bang from the buck from the network provider, as well as your bang for the buck in the infrastructure.
Okay. We have a question. We are an Office 365 customer. How does Silver Peak integrate with Office 365 and Skype for Business?
And that's a big trend, by the way, so, both of those, especially Skype for Business. So one of the learnings I think we've had working with many customers making that transition is that both applications vastly benefit from doing something that's called direct-to-net or local breakout. So if you think about an MPLS network today, and you have a user sitting in their branch office, and you have your data center that is the other end of the MPLS network, the only path for the Skype for Business or Office 365 is to go from your branch office to your data center. It goes through your firewall, and then it goes to the internet, where it's then looking to go to Office 365. And so if you imagine, especially with a global customer, where there's maybe offices that are sort of spread states or even between different countries, that is a very inefficient path from a latency point of view, and so that's not good from a real-time operation or voice quality point of view. And it's also expensive because you're transporting that traffic on your expensive MPLS network to then dump it out to the internet. And one of the pieces that is not in every SD-WAN, but it is in Silver Peak Edge Connect, is this capability to be able to say, this type of traffic I want to allow to exit directly from the branch office, directly to the internet, and get it a much more bandwidth and also a much more direct path to its destination. The thing that hasn't been done before is that you need to be able to reliably rent Office 365 or Skype for Business from the 300 million other web applications. And so to do that is fairly complex. And so that's where we added this piece of technology that I alluded to, the first packet IQ, that allows us to essentially recognize from the destination IP address of the Skype for Business or Office 365 communication, which service at Microsoft is it going to, which physical location is that IP address hosted out of, right? Is it the US, is it Singapore? And that map of IP addresses to service is something that is constantly changing. So if you looked at your Office 365 connection today in your network, you might find that it's sitting on an IP address that next month could be something else. And so the only way that you can really configure these direct-to-net policies in a robust manner is to have an automated machine system behind it that's going to track the range of these IP addresses. And so we have different methods of doing that with Office 365. We actually plug into a data feed that's coming straight from Microsoft. So your branch offices are always up to date on recognizing Office 365 traffic, and our best practice today is certainly break that out straight from the branch office to the internet, better experience, and it's going to also offload your MPLS network.
Thank you. Great. If you guys have any other questions, all feel free to enter them into the chat box.
So while people are wrapping up their last questions, I've got kind of a question direct to you, Raul. It's kind of the patient and what we're seeing from our customers, and it's I think the the MPLS arbitrage way of thinking. But if I kind of break down SD-WAN into early adopters and current adopters, are you seeing the same trend that I believe we're seeing, which is, as people get comfortable with SD-WAN, they're not just continuing to leave the MPLS network there and be happy not continuing to upgrade its bandwidth, but they're actually dropping MPLS altogether.
Yes, we see a lot of that. So generally, the first ROI is I have this new application. Now I would have to increase my MPLS bandwidth. Now with SD-WAN, I can keep my MPLS constant and just sort of add to the internet. But then as these contracts expire, there's kind of two strategies that we see customers take. One is some negotiating, bargaining leverage. And so we definitely see some customers where the renewal discussion may be one that goes a lot more towards the interest of the customer. So one thing is you may be able to renew at a better rate if you have the credible alternative of actually moving your traffic off of the MPLS with an SD-WAN. If you're natively running on MPLS, renewal is not going to go very well for you, right? Basically, you have no real alternative than renewing the contract. It's very disruptive to do that. With a software-defined network, because you have the abstraction, it's very easy to go and flip out one of switch out one of the transport mechanisms underneath. But we are actually surprisingly seeing even very large enterprises. So a couple of weeks ago, one of our customers in the UK, that's a large sort of global law firm, big office, big building of 20 floors and 600 lawyers and admins, etc. And they were running hybrid the last I knew, but he actually has gone to business-grade internet, augmented with a consumer-grade internet, and he fully cut off the MPLS. So that is something that large customers are doing now, and that is a bit of surprise to us because generally at that scale, the MPLS bill is you're more sensitive to quality issues and being able to have agility and deploy applications faster than kind of the cost-cutting exercise. But users today are so comfortable with these technologies that they feel they have the visibility and the control, or they can even steer some of your applications, take some of these segments, steal them off the MPLS. You still have it there, but you can now get comfortable with the fact that you're essentially running strictly on the internet or running maybe with a 4G LTE as the secondary link to a site. And so as you do that, then it's a little bit less of a leap of faith to then just let it go. So that is certainly happening.
Excellent.
So because we don't have any other questions, I would like to say thank you to everyone that joined, and thank you for your attention, and especially thanks to Jay and Raul for providing such amazing content. This was wildly interesting. Again, I left my email in the chat box if you think of any questions as you go throughout your day marinating this content. That will close up. Thanks to everyone.